It seems like it was just like yesterday. It's been 4 months now ago that we were asking the question, what will education look like in the fall? And now here we are. It's August 19th, and we are heading into the school year. And we've got some answers about what education will look like in the fall, but we have a lot of questions. So I'm really excited about our topic today, the learning model that is proven to work in COVID-era teaching. And this presentation, this webinar today is about that topic, but it is also about the instructors and the teachers that will make those learning models happen. So I want to begin today with this question. I want us to think back to this question of, is there a teacher who changed your life? Did a teacher change your life? And as I talk to people and I ask this question, almost everybody can say yes to that question. So I want to invite all of you, I want to invite our audience to think back on your education pathway, whatever it was. And is there a teacher, an instructor, a professor that changed your life, that showed you that you had an interest or an aptitude you didn't know that you had, that put your career on a trajectory or your life on a trajectory that it would not have been on if not for that teacher? Just pause for a moment and think about who that individual might have been. For me, there were three. The first one was here at Longfellow Middle School, the infamous Longfellow Middle School. And I can tell you that I wasn't much for math class or history or sitting through an English lecture when I was in middle school. But once a day, we got to go back to this part of the school. It was in the way back on the lower level, and that is where Mr. Brusky's art classroom was. And that class was different. Rather than just listening to a lecture or reading out of a book, we got to do things, we got to build things, we got to create things. We made jewelry, we made these beautiful 3D letters. I even made this prism. They called it a 100-unit project. It was a gigantic prism. I bet that thing was like 3 feet tall. I made it out of toothpicks and painted it fluorescent green. It was awesome. I went back to that school 15 years later, and that prism was still hanging in a display classroom. And I would like to think in many ways that that lit the spark of building and creating and producing something in me. And I wonder sometimes, did that spark ignite my interest in the world of manufacturing and producing physical goods that led to a rewarding 20-plus year career in the world of manufacturing? And I think the answer to that question is probably yes. When I think about great teachers, I think about my friend Jim Teedra. Jim was a high school teacher. He was a football coach. I admit that I didn't actually have him as a teacher, but I learned a tremendous amount from Jim. I even penned a tribute to him in 2015 after he passed away following a fight with brain cancer. And I talked about all the lessons that I learned from Jim, about the importance of goal setting and keeping my word and never forgetting what and who got me to where I was. A final example was a person named Dick Davis. Dick was a philosophy professor of all things at Marquette University, where I went to school. And I used to sit in his room and we would argue and debate about all kinds of things. And I wrote an article about that as well not too many years ago. And he taught me lessons about freedom of thought and independence, and that those things are more important than money or than building wealth. In some ways, I like to think that those lessons planted the seeds of our company being a mission-driven company, that mission being to secure the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Now, I learned a lot of lessons from Professor Davis. I even went back to his office one time to thank him for all the lessons I learned from him, and he wasn't there. I learned years later when I put his name into a search engine that the reason he wasn't there is that he had passed away 15 years before I searched for him. He actually had a heart attack on a plane between Bangkok and Tokyo, no doubt living out that same spirit of independence and freedom that he had instilled in me so many years before. So here's the point of all this. The truth of the matter is that none of these people probably recognized that they were changing my life in the way that they did while it was happening. And in that same sense, the educators and the instructors that are on our webinar today, that are with us today, have no idea the ways in which you are influencing the lives of your students. But you no doubt are influencing them and showing them that they can do things that they didn't know that they could do, and putting their lives on a trajectory that they didn't know that they could be on. So to our teachers and our instructors and our educators, this is our way of saying thank you for doing that, for everything that you do in your classrooms and in your labs, and now in this new world of virtual teaching. And in the midst of all the debates about coming back to school and making sure that our students and our faculty and our administrators are safe in the midst of this crazy world of education, let us keep in mind that in the end, it is about our students, that CTE is about securing the American dream for the future of STEM and manufacturing talent. And for that, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. Now, that work is becoming more difficult, is it not? We are in a world that many of us have never seen. In fact, all of us have never seen before. And so we are having to come up with more creative ways, with more flexible ways to teach our students than ever before. And we have to be open to new and creative and flexible ways. So here to talk with us about that topic today is my friend, Kevin Barnes. Kevin is a full-time industrial electricity instructor at Michigan's Kellogg Community College, and he's been there for 15 years. Kevin is also a part-time instructor at Western Michigan University, where he has been teaching for 9 years. He is a state of Michigan master electrician, and he holds a master's degree in career and technical education. Kevin, it is such a pleasure to have you with us today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Matt.
And we are going to learn a ton from you. I've already learned a ton from you, and I want to dive right in. We have a ton of questions as we talk about this whole idea of COVID era instruction in the world of CTE. But I'd like to start by asking you this question. Your program is really unique, and can you take a moment or two to tell us and our audience about your unique program and teaching model at Kellogg Community College?
Sure. We started back in 1990 with the model of a totally open entry, open exit, competency-based instructional program. And basically what that means is we do not have any dedicated lectures. We don't per se have any dedicated lab times. We're set up so that you can begin our programs at any time throughout the semester. You don't have to sign up for a full 3-credit course. You can sign up for smaller, what we call modules. And the best way I can describe a module is we take the content out of, say, 2 possible class sessions, and we'll package it into a self-directed packet. And so what that allows us to do, especially with our location, we're right out in the middle of our industrial park in Battle Creek, Michigan. We are not on the main campus. So with us being out there, ready to serve our industrial clients, it allows us to actually customize a program. Probably the best analogy I can use for that would be the salad bar at Golden Corral. With that, if an employer, if a employee, if a student needs certain skill sets, they can sign up for certain amounts of content that's going to specifically meet their needs. We've been doing this since 1990. It's worked out very well for us. It's not the answer to everything, but for our market and for what we're trying to do with the content we're trying to provide, it does a very nice job.
Indeed it does, and it's certainly a very, very creative model. I know, Kevin, when we chat with instructors literally all over the Midwest about the challenges associated with a self-guided learning model or a flipped classroom, many of them raise the question or the concern about whether the students have the self-discipline to be able to follow that model and be successful with it. Clearly, over the course of several decades now, you have proven that this model works. Can you talk a little bit and address the concerns about a student and their self-discipline and making sure that that student stays on track in the process of their learning?
So typically, a lot of our students are going to be more the non-traditional. We'll see a lot of students that are going to be 40, 45 years old. They're already employed. At that point, they know what they need to learn. And so we typically don't have a hard time having them stay on track and learn the material. But what we're also seeing is we're seeing a big shift to younger students. And even with that, really because of our model being a good combination of hands-on as well as self-directed learning, whether it be online, book work, anything like that, they stay pretty focused since they're able to switch it up a lot and do different areas. The other thing I look at right now, we're actually, I feel we are grooming people to be more successful in this model, because everybody's had to go online, and they've had to do more of the self-discipline to stay focused, to learn online. And that's going to carry right over into this instructional model very well, I believe.
No question. And are there certain things that an instructor can do to make sure that students stay on track as you're facing some of those challenges of self-discipline and staying focused?
So typically when a student is working through the program, as they pass one of our modules, they'll be coming to us to get a final checkout on it. And so that gives us kind of a good way to gauge how they're doing. Are they completing modules? Are they having problems with certain modules? Every module has a certain amount of hours attached to it, maybe 6 hours, maybe 8 hours. And that's pretty much inclusive of any reading that has to be done, any lab work, anything like that. So typically, if we're not seeing a student coming up and bringing us modules, that's going to be a red flag for us. We can then follow through with the students. And oftentimes, now that we're getting a lot of newer students or younger students, what we may do is we'll set up goals for them. We've never had to do that in the past with the older population, but now that we've shifted over to more of the dual enrolled, the early college model that state of Michigan is using now, we have to do some different things to keep them on track, but it's worked out very well.
So certainly setting all kinds of goals is really important, making sure that you're creating those toll gates, if you will, for your students and ensuring that you're keeping them on track. Sounds like a really, really successful effort in this open entry and open exit model. Now that model, it's interesting. There are some parts of the state of Michigan that are really, really densely populated. Now, you're not necessarily delivering instruction in all of those really populated areas. I know you've got some rural campuses and rural students as well. Tell us a little bit about how the location of your campuses and the rural nature of some of your district influences the need for an open entry and open exit model in education.
Okay, so even our main program location right in Battle Creek, we've got a pretty good population there, but yet it's not a huge market that we're serving. We also offer the program in another community called Coldwater, and we're getting ready to offer it in a third community. It's the same program, and those communities are also very rural. And so what this model does is it allows us to offer a wide variety of instructional content that we wouldn't necessarily be able to offer because we would never get enough people to actually have a full class. Good examples there would be, say, motor controls or programmable logic controllers, anything like that. You're going to fill a class with that, no problem. We get into some of the other areas, maybe with fire alarm systems or functional safety is a new topic that's really getting a lot of interest. Yet I don't have a lot of people that are going to need that at the same time. So with that, with our model, I can have the content created, I can have the equipment on hand, and if I only get 1 or 2 people in a semester that are going to be utilizing that equipment, utilizing that content, so be it. We're not having to try and fill a class with 8, 10, 12 people just to get it to run. And it really allows us to serve our industry partners as well as our educational partners.
And you mentioned a couple of times the industry partners you talked about early on in one of the answers to a question you brought up right away, the fact that you've got incumbent workers, in some cases some older workers, older students in your programs. Does this program lend itself well to a workforce training model?
It's actually, that's one of its major strengths with the open entry, open exit model. Good example would be if a company out that we're serving hires somebody in, they hire them in on a Tuesday. During orientation on Wednesday, they realize that they are weak in a certain area, drives or certain motor control concept. They could actually send them over to our facility on Thursday to begin that training. And so that makes it very nice that they don't have to wait till the start of the next semester. They can dive right in. If they understand the rest of the concepts, they're not having to retake all of that content that you would have to in a traditional class. So it really works out nice that we're open entry, open exit. You can start at any time. The other nice advantage to our concept is we have our lab open to students, typically 40 hours a week. And those hours are going to range anywhere from 8 in the morning till 8 at night. And especially dealing with industrial students, you're going to have a lot of people. They're going to be first shift, second shift, third shift. With our model, we can accommodate all three shifts in some manner or another. The other nice thing about it, since you're not locked into taking a lecture or having a specific lab time on say a Tuesday at 2 o'clock, if you get an employee that's on a swing shift or something like that, where they work first shift one week, then their second shift the next week, third shift the next week, they can never take a traditional model. That would not work for them. So with our model, they just come in early one week, come in a little bit later the next week. It works out great for them.
So a tremendous amount of flexibility, and flexibility, is it not, is the absolute name of the game here in this new world of education. As we've been through this COVID era, something that nobody saw coming, something that none of us expected we would be living through here in 2020, how has your model and the fact that it was already in place lent itself to be able to continue instruction in a time when so many courses and so many programs are being disrupted?
So again, it was really nice. Our student base already understood how we operated. They understood how that would be able to help them to continue with their education during the whole COVID issues. It's also, since we were so modularized, it allowed us to work bit by bit to get stuff adapted to more of a virtual environment. And in a lot of cases, we've just been able to take a lot of our material, a lot of our content, put it into our learning management system, and it's allowing students to do a lot of the work remotely. And then it really eases up the time that they have to come in and actually work on our lab equipment. I'm very fortunate that we've got a pretty good sized lab space, so we're able to follow social distancing measures for that. We've worked out a scheduling system where a student they're gonna block off a time to work with a certain trainer. We have them do all the online stuff first and test out of everything and get their competencies there. Then they come in, they finish it off by doing some hands-on with us in the lab.
And I think about the flexibility of your model, the fact that students are able to learn remotely, also learn in the lab. That flexibility is absolutely huge, but is a lot different, right, than a traditional lockstep model where a student or a cohort of students might be sitting in a classroom listening to a lecture and then going out to the lab and performing their hands-on skills. This model has to put a lot of stress and a lot of demands on the instructor. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the instructor has to function a little bit differently in the challenges that your model presents to you and the folks that you work with in delivering instruction?
So yeah, one of the main, I guess, caveats with doing this is the fact that you've got to be on all the time. Traditional instructors, they are going to have they know what topic they're going to cover that week or what topic they're going to cover for the next session. They can prepare for it. They know what they're going to have. With us, we've got to do a little more of the work up front, and we got to have a good solid base within our modular contents so that the student can self-direct and go through that. But typically when we're working with students, we really don't know what we're going to be working on any given time. You may be working on the industrial controllers. You might be working on our National Electrical Code, two opposite subjects within our field. And so that's what does make it a little bit of a challenge, but yet it also makes it very interesting because every day is going to be a little bit of a different day for you. It's not going to be so much of a lockstep. And it's also one of those things that since we're doing this more of a one-on-one, it gives you more of a personal feeling when you're working with a student. It's definitely a more intimate way of presenting the material to that student.
And your students are the beneficiaries, of course, and you suggested a little bit earlier that the typical student and the profile has changed a little bit. 15, 16 years is a long time to be teaching in a community college. I'm sure you've seen just about everything, but tell us, how is the typical student in your program, the profile of that student changed in the period of time that you've been instructing?
So typical student, they started off, when I first got there, most of them were 40 to 45 years old, and they were they were not a self-paced student, meaning they're not going to try and find a job. They're already working in the industry. They're already doing an apprenticeship of some sort. What we've seen in a lot of cases is that has really shifted back, in that we're seeing a lot of younger students. So we're having to change our, a lot of our instructional ideas on that. Typical student, we really don't have a typical student. They're all over the board, which again makes it very enjoyable for us, because you're not locked into a whole classroom of just one age group or something like that. The other thing, we really see a lot of that within our lab. It won't happen as much this year, but with the age spread, we would have a student that is 50, 55. We'd have another student in there that's going to be a typical high school student. And you begin to see interactions between those students. And in most cases, it's a very positive interaction. They're learning from each other. And that's been a very nice thing with it.
And learning from each other in many ways is what career technical education is all about. And on that topic of learning from each other, can you share maybe a few tips with your fellow instructors at other institutions that may be considering a flexible or open entry, open exit model like yours? What are those things that they should be thinking about, maybe 2 or 3 items as they're considering a similar model?
It's definitely, it's a whole different game when you start looking at the open entry, open exit model. I am fortunate in that I do traditional instruction over at Western. And so I am exposed on both sides of it. I still can honestly say I prefer this model. What's really nice about it is, again, you're able to offer so much more for the students, for the employers, for the school partners and so on. But you've got to be a little more prepared. You have to have your content has to be spelled out very well. You have to remain flexible. The one thing you have to realize is that you will not be in a situation where you're going to be in a class for 50 minutes, say, or hour and a half, where you're presenting to everybody, and then you're able to get away from it and not have to worry about that. With this model, you're not at that much of an intense pace, but you definitely got a pace going all day long. And you're going from one subject to the other. Again, you're bouncing back and forth a lot. So the whole idea is just to be flexible and understand you're just gonna be working one-on-one a lot more with students, which allows you to get to know the student better, allows you to get to know their learning styles better. So you may realize as you're working with a student, you're able to really point them in more directions. If they're more of an audio learner or more of a visual learner, you can point, make sure you pay attention to the videos as opposed to the reading, stuff like that you can do. Just the idea is just, you got to have an open mind as you go into it. You got to be flexible on it.
So open mind and flexible, and then I love the whole idea of getting to know the individual student as a learner and make sure that you're catering your instruction to the way that individual learns. When we talked about earlier in the webinar today, really figuring out how we inspire every individual student. That is the magic that an instructor like you, Kevin, and others work in the classroom and in the lab every single day of the week. I wonder if we might close before opening up the discussion to some audience questions. With this question, as you think about those students, as you think about the way that you've been able to influence them and inspire them, is there a particular student success story that comes to mind that you'd like to share with the group?
So, I mean, we've got any amount of success stories, but one that comes to mind, we had a student, he was working in industry, not specifically in the electrical industry, but in the industrial settings as kind of a subcontractor. It was the type of thing that required that he did a lot of traveling, but yet he wanted to get into the electrical field. He wanted to learn more about the electrical field. And with his job, he wouldn't be able to really take a traditional class. He could do online, but he wanted to have more, more of the hands-on, more of the face-to-face interaction as well. And so when I first met Mike and we started talking about that, and I explained to him our format, he was very tickled with it. He was really interested in it. The fact that if he had got sent out of town during a specific week, he wasn't going to fall behind, because with our model, you've got the semester to complete the content you signed up for. So on weeks that he was working close to home, or maybe weeks that he was not going to be out in the field working, he could spend more time in the lab and work on stuff. Weeks that he was going to be gone, he would take his laptop and he could do stuff, check in with us online, do a lot of the online stuff, do a lot of the reading stuff. So even though he'd be remote, he could still work on the stuff. And this was a situation that worked out really well for Mike. And he was one of the students that was really able to leverage that format. And I think he's done pretty well with it.
Perfect. And I can speak from experience that you put Mike on a trajectory that he would not have been on if you hadn't done that. Can I assume that you're talking about Mike McKelvey before we present a little bit of a surprise for our audience?
Hey, Kevin, Matt.
Mike.
Hello, Mike. So Kevin, we knew from our prep time that you might mention Mike's name. We wanted to bring Mike McKelvey on. For him to be your student success story, and what a great surprise for our audience to be able to invite Mike along. Mike, great to have you with us today. And I'm sure it's great to see Kevin here virtually. And Mike,
yes.
And I have a question for you. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in Kevin's classes and in Kevin's program? In the end, it's about the student. We can have great ideas, we can say that they work, but in the end, it's really the students and the employers that are going to determine and decide whether or not they do or not. Tell us a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, about your experience in Kevin's program.
Yes, it was. First of all, I just want to share that it's the environment at the Kellogg RMTC there. It's very welcoming. It's warm. It's inviting. The instructors are there. Kevin and his team, they want you to learn. They want you to see you succeed. They want to see you grow into whatever job field that you're in. And so with that, I was able to sit down and have a meeting with Kevin, and he laid out the courses. I gave him the direction where I needed to go, and he went through and picked out the modules that he was speaking of. And then from there, I was able to take Kevin's suggestion, go back to my company and shared with them. And we were able to pick and pull, and it was very tailored education to what we were looking for the specific job role that I was in, to get the extra knowledge and new understandings that I needed in the electrical field and the PLCs and the motor control, and just how everything was really, it was able to tailor down to my specific needs. And like Kevin said, I was traveling in and out of work, in and out of the state to different jobs sometimes. And so I was there 1 week and then maybe gone for a week, and there for 2 or 3 weeks and then gone. But I never fell behind, because I was able to stay on top of it with the virtual e-learning that we were doing, that is becoming what's going to be happening this school year, and just the great success that I had doing that.
Awesome. And what a fantastic story, Mike. And Mike and I get the opportunity to work together. Kevin, I want to make sure that I thank you for instilling all the skills and competencies and putting Mike on the trajectory that he was on, because he's just an absolutely fantastic person and a great product of your program. So thank you to you both. Melissa, I want to find out if we had any interesting questions roll in from the audience during the fascinating discussion today.
Absolutely. And the first question I'm actually going to direct to Kevin. Kevin, this person says, I saw some pictures of Amatrol equipments during this presentation. Do you use Amatrol's e-learning, and do you think that will help with distance learning this year?
Yes and yes. So we've been a longtime user of the Amatrol learning management system. Quite honest, we're just now, because of the COVID stuff, we are creating that in SCORM packets to put into our native learning management system for the college to make it a seamless single sign-on. But what's been really nice about it is the Amatrol learning, or the Amatrol learning activity packets, the labs, are actually, they lend themselves very well to our format, in that the length of them is just about right for one of our modules. And so it's been really a very seamless thing. And there's a lot of the Amatrol content that it's multifaceted, as far as it'll have videos, it'll have simulations, it'll have reading, different activities like that have worked out very well, that we're very comfortable to get put into an online environment. And again, then it allows that student to actually do some of their lab work, even with using the simulations, before they have to come in and work on our lab stuff. And there again, that unfortunately we're having to, time is going to be a hot commodity in any of our labs this year. So if we can do some of that stuff outside in a virtual environment, it's definitely going to help us out. But yeah, the Amatrol stuff has worked out very well for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Matt, I'm going to direct this question to you. How do you foresee a model like this or some version of a model like this being used in a high school setting?
Well, that's a fantastic question, and that's the reality that we're in. I mean, we work with high schools and school districts all over the Midwest, and every one of them has a different version of how they are getting back to school. And some are 100% virtual, some are 100% in the classroom, and many of them have a hybrid model. So we feel that this model fits really, really well into any CTE program in a high school for a high school student because of the exact topics that Kevin hit on. We can teach the instruction in the virtual learning model. As Mike McAlvey mentioned, we have an e-learning platform where the student can go through the theory at home and then perform the hands-on skills either on a virtual simulator, which we all agree isn't the same as being on a hands-on skills trainer or hands-on equipment, but it is certainly better than the absence of any of that. And so we can put them on a virtual trainer and then either in a rotational model with the equipment moving from a student's home to another student's home, or getting them in a socially distanced fashion in the lab doing their hands-on skills. It works really, really well. Also, because it's competency-based, then the student can work at their own pace, and they're not necessarily being, if they need a little more time on a topic, they have that time available to them. If they want to move a little faster, they have the ability to do that well. So we see it fitting really, really well into a high school model, and we have a number of high schools, many high schools that are doing exactly that.
Great, thanks, Matt. I think we have time for one more audience question. Kevin, this one is directed to you. This individual says, Kevin, I liked your comments about not needing a large number of students for any particular course. Would you talk more about your schedule? Do you have multiple faculty available for competency testing throughout the day, or is testing by appointment?
So that's a great question. So with that, as I said before, our lab is open a total of 40 hours a week. And in most labs, we'll have either 2 instructors. Our entire facility, I should back up. Our entire facility teaches this open entry, open exit model. So everything that's out there in that building is the same model as the electrical program. And every lab will have either 2 instructors or at least an instructor and an instructional assistant. So with that, if we have 8 to 10 people at any one time, that's a pretty good number in a lab. You've got to remember that that's not going to fill a class, but that's also going to be slow and steady. That's going to be throughout the entire day. So that would be the equivalent of having 30 students in a lab. And so with that, since they're all staggered in what they're working on and so on, a lot of the time we will have our testing set up. We're actually moving a lot of our testing into our learning management system, where we have a testing center right there on site where they're proctored and they're monitored, and we have different personnel that will do that for us. But then a lot of the hands-on assessments and competencies, we're back there to work with the student and we can watch them. And by having at least 2 people in the lab, it allows one person to totally focus on that assessment while the other person is maybe assisting other students.
Great, thank you. I think we have a couple of follow-up questions. Again, we can always put you in touch with Kevin if you have more specific questions about his program, but Matt, I will turn things over to you to wrap up.
All right, well, thank you, Melissa. First, thanks to our audience for some really, really good questions, well thought out questions. And as Melissa suggested, please keep those rolling in, email them to us, put them in the chat, and we will make sure that either Kevin or we circle back. It's August 19th. I mean, we're at the end of the planning session and getting ready to roll into the school year. In some cases, some of our districts are already in session, as hard as it is as hard as it is to believe that. So as we plan for this coming year and the years to come and this new model of education, I want to make sure that I'm thanking our guests today. Kevin Barnes, you were absolutely phenomenal. Mike McAlvey, thank you so much for being on, and so glad to see that you were inspired by Kevin and his program in the way that you were.